Well, hello again, and welcome back to our Sunday school lesson in the series Evangelism Principles and Perspectives. We began our study by looking at God's heart for the lost and seeing how He loves to see sinners saved. After that, we saw our joy in evangelism and then began to explore what evangelism is and what evangelism isn't in relationship to the message of the gospel. One of our interns, Ben Trainer, taught us on God's sovereignty in evangelism. And last week we talked about how our prayer lives matter in the work of evangelism. God's heart, our joy, the message of the gospel, God's sovereignty, and our prayers. That's what we've been looking at so far here in this study. And as we begin today, I want to let you know that we're going to be turning the page a bit in this lesson, from principles and perspectives to the practicals of evangelism. As we begin, I want to ask you a question. I want you to consider something. What comes to mind when you think of an evangelist? What images come to mind? Who do you think of? What context do you typically think that evangelism happens in? Maybe you think of Billy Graham and the Crusades in the 20th century. Maybe you think of a preacher up front giving an altar call for people to come down in front. Maybe you think of a certain program or evangelism exercise. Maybe you think of someone drawing a bridge diagram on a napkin at a coffee shop. There are many things that we could think of when it comes to evangelizing. Keep that image in your head. We're going to come back to that. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and flip them open to Acts 26. Acts 26. Here we see that Paul is in trouble for talking about Jesus. Paul was a strange person. All he could talk about was Jesus. Paul was strategic, he was passionate, he was bold, and predictably this landed him in a lot of trouble. And his trouble moves him from the Roman tribune to the Jewish chief priests and council, and then he's sent to Felix, the governor. He appeals to Caesar and is finally afforded an audience with King Agrippa. And that's where we're at here. All the while, Paul is talking about Jesus and the gospel. Before Agrippa, he shares his testimony. He shares his call to ministry, and he shares the message of the gospel. Let's pick up in verse 27. Paul says, "King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you believe." And Agrippa said to Paul, "In a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian?" Paul replied, "Whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains." Paul pressed Agrippa over his own beliefs. "King Agrippa, what do you believe? Do you believe the prophets?" And the king responded, "In a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian?" In a short time. It's interesting. In other words, Paul, are you asking me to make a decision here and now? "I don't know if I'm ready for that," says King Agrippa. And Paul replies, "Doesn't matter to me, whether it's short or it's long. I only want you to become like me, a follower of Jesus Christ." Paul wants to see Agrippa saved. And he says, "I'm willing to pursue it immediately, in a short time, or incrementally over a long time." Short or long. Many times when we think of evangelism, maybe you want to go back now to what you were thinking of a minute ago. But when we think of evangelism, I think most of us think that decisions in evangelism happen in a short time. We share, they respond. Sometimes it's favorable, and sometimes it's not. But no matter what, we tend to move on. If that's the case, then we can close the case often in this type of evangelism. Paul tells Agrippa it doesn't matter to him if it's a short decision or a long decision. All Paul cares about is that Agrippa might be saved, that he might become a follower of Jesus, that he might become like Paul. And here's what we can learn from that. Sometimes evangelism is short, and sometimes evangelism is long. When it's short, it feels like it's immediate. It's almost instantaneous. I can recall moments in my life and my ministry where I've had the chance to share the gospel with someone and then pray with them right then and there. And it's almost like a light turns on, and overnight their life is entirely changed. They've become a Christian right in front of my eyes. That happens sometimes, and let's praise God for that. But you know what else Paul says? He says whether it's short or long. Sometimes evangelism is a long process. Sometimes evangelism can take days or weeks or months or even years. Sometimes evangelism can look to our human eyes as if it's happening incrementally, slowly, as if the person we're witnessing to is getting it a little at a time over a long period of time. And to be honest with you, friends, in my experience in the work of evangelism, I think long evangelism is actually more likely. It's more likely, and I think it's often more fruitful in the end. I think today, more and more, we will have to embrace long evangelism. Some might call this process evangelism. I want to call this long evangelism simply evangelism in the context of relationships. Long evangelism or evangelism in the context of relationships. More and more, I think we're going to need to embrace evangelism in the context of relationships, probably over a long period of time. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I don't think this long evangelism is the only way that evangelism happens. It won't always work out this way. It's certainly not a risk-free way to do it. There is no silver bullet. We can't reverse engineer how God shapes people's hearts and minds and how he draws them to himself. That's not what we're talking about. But long evangelism and a perspective of long evangelism, I think could be helpful for us. I think it could be clarifying for us. It's the normal way evangelism happens, in my experience, through the context of relationships. So here's what we're going to do. I've done this before. I apologize if it's awkward, but I'm going to need you to stop this right here and right now. Stop the video, pause, and here's what I'd like you to do. I need you to go and download today's worksheet because we're going to be working off of it, and I think it'll help you to have it in front of you. If you don't know where that is, it's on the webpage. If you don't know where that is, go to christcovenant.org, look for the Sunday header at the top, click on that, click on Sunday Schools, and you'll find our page. What we're looking for is a worksheet called the 5 Wins of Evangelistic Relationships. The 5 Wins of Evangelistic Relationships. So go ahead, feel free, pause the video right here and now, download it, print it. I'd love for you to have it in front of you as we walk through the next 5 wins of evangelistic relationships. Okay, you got it? Let's get started. In long evangelism, building relationships is one of the most important things that you can do. We know without a shadow of a doubt that God is the one who controls all men's hearts. He's the one alone who can change people's hearts. We're not debating that for a minute. That's why we talked about God's sovereignty in our prayers before we talked about the practicals, because we believe that no practicals are going to help us if God is not in it. But if you think about it, relationships really matter. Relationships matter. Think about Christianity. It's all about relationships. The entire Bible is about God's relationship with humanity. How does a holy God dwell with a sinful people? That's what the entire Bible is about. The gospel is about restoring our relationship with God through the person of Jesus Christ. Furthermore, just consider our own human relationships. The Bible speaks to how do we relate to one another? How do we treat each other? Our Lord said in the Great Commandment, we are to love God and be in relationship with Him, and we are to love others and be in relationship with them. It's all about relationships. So if we're going to be a Christian who cares deeply about the people around us, we've got to get good at building, developing, and maintaining relationships. So before we get started in looking at these 5 wins, here's what we are not trying to do. Here's what we're not trying to do. Friends, we aren't trying to manipulate anyone. We are not trying to put on a false face. We aren't trying to do a bait and switch. We are starting with a heart that cares deeply for the people around us. And we want to think carefully about how our actions, our words, and our expressions communicate that which is in our heart. That's what we're trying to do. We want to be careful to consider how those actions, words, and expressions either aid or hinder our ability to build relationships. Okay, with that preface, are we ready for the 5 wins of evangelistic relationships? I hope you are. We're about ready to dive in. Win number 1, win their smile. Win their smile. Smiling is one of those things you don't think about after preschool. You just either do it or you don't. We often don't think about smiling and we consider it a reaction. But smiling is a very powerful human expression. 13 years ago, one of the most popular videos ever was uploaded to YouTube. In it are 2 small English brothers, Harry and Charlie. They're playing with one another. The older brother, Harry, is letting his younger brother, Charlie, bite down on his finger in his mouth. And it's funny for Harry at first, until Charlie bites down and Harry screams with pain. The camera stays on them, though. It stays with Charlie. And he's just 1 year old. But soon, what does he do? He starts to laugh. He starts to giggle with pleasure. He and his brother are having a moment. And eventually, his older brother, Harry, his face goes from pain to laughter too. The Charlie Bit My Finger video has been viewed almost 1 billion times. Why is that simple video of a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old so powerful? Why have almost 1 billion people watch that video? I think it's because we love to see people smile. We love to see people laugh and having a good time, a joyful time. Think about this for a minute with me. In the United Kingdom, only 75% of people believe that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. In Mexico, China, and Indonesia, less than 1/3 of all people in those countries believe that Al-Qaeda had anything to do with 9/11. In Europe, only about half of the people believe there is a God. Friends, today it is very hard to get people to agree on anything except the power of smiling. Get a load of this. According to the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, 99.7% of adults believe that smiling is an important social asset. Virtually everyone agrees smiling matters. So what does smiling have anything to do with evangelism? Well, in short evangelism, I don't think it might mean much. But in long evangelism, in evangelism in the context of relationships, it might be everything. Smiling helps us generate a positive response to whatever we're talking about. It helps us find common ground. It helps people that you're in contact say, I'd love to see that person again. Think about the person who doesn't smile, who is constantly frowning. Who wants to be friends with someone like that? Who wants to spend time with them? Who wants to be engaged in long evangelism, in evangelism in the context of relationships with someone who can't smile? Winning their smile can go a long way. Indeed, friends, think about the fruit of the Spirit. It's love, it's joy, it's peace, it's patience, it's kindness, it's goodness. Tell me that smiling isn't a part of love. Tell me that smiling isn't a part of joy, of kindness, of goodness. If you're like me, Smiling does not come natural. The natural disposition of my face is not joy. It's not to smile. And I've had to be conscious about my facial expressions because this face does not communicate that there is hope and joy to be found in the gospel. Win number one, win their smile. Win number two, win their trust. Thinker Jonathan Haidt created a metaphor for describing people like you and me. He likens us all to a rider on a giant elephant. Our emotional side is the elephant, and our rational side is the rider on top. Perched atop the elephant, the rider holds the reins and seems to be the leader. But the rider's control is lacking because he is so small and the elephant is so big. Anytime the 6-ton elephant and the rider disagree about which way to go, friends, you know what's going to happen. The rider is going to lose. For most people, I think the rational side of us is the rider. We like to think it's in control, but in reality, our emotions are the elephant that can take us in any direction they want. So if we're going to win people's trust, we are going to have to win both the elephant and the rider. Now, this doesn't mean that someone can't change their mind in an instant, but if they do change their mind about Christianity, about Christians, about the church, about the claims of Christ, there's a good chance that it will be because their emotional side is starting to agree with them. Their intuition, their imagination, where their decisions about who and who can't be trusted begin to think that's not so bad. We need to have both the rider and the elephant walking in our direction. So I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about the person who led you to Jesus. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a campus worker. Maybe it was a pastor or a friend. But if I had to bet, whoever that person was or that person is, it was probably someone that you trusted. This was someone who shared the gospel with you, yes, but they also showed interest in you. They served you. They remembered your name, your story. Maybe it was someone who you knew just did an excellent job around the office. They had earned a reputation as a good worker. God's message is all that has power to change people's lives, but the message can't be completely separated from the messenger. Go back and look at the top 10 list that we've been working off of. The top 10 list of people that you are asking God to move in their lives. Friends, do they trust you? Do they call you when they are in need? Do they depend on you? Do you ever depend on them? Do you spend time with them? Do you go to their events? Do you take interest in what they are interested in? Friends, trust matters. What can we do to build trust? Well, we can count others as more significant than ourselves. Philippians 2, 3, and 4. We can serve them practically. Mark 10:45. We can listen to them. We can learn from them. If you are just getting to know someone, you can remember them. Friends, I don't think there's anything worse than meeting someone a couple times and then having to go up and reintroduce yourself because they don't remember your name. Remembering their name, remembering something significant about them, remembering them can go a long way to building trust. How do you build trust? Simply show them that you care. What if you had an encounter with someone and they left saying, wow, they didn't have to do that? Now that's building trust. Win number 2, win their trust. Win number 3, win their curiosity. If you are a parent of a small child or have ever been a parent of a small child, or maybe you have been a babysitter of a small child at some point, you'll know the power of curiosity. Have you ever told a 5-year-old, don't go into the closet? There's something there for you on your birthday. Well, you might as well be telling them to go directly into the closet as soon as you turn their back. Why? Why would this 5-year-old deliberately disobey the command of their parent? It's because they're curious. My goodness, what could be in that closet? Maybe it's a toy truck. Maybe it's a baseball bat. Maybe it's my chocolate cake, but I don't know what it is. I've got to go find out immediately. I can't wait to find out. Children are curious. But if we're honest, you and I are curious too. Adults are curious. Friends, what if non-believers were curious about your life? What if they saw the decisions you were making, the way you treated people, the priorities you set, and said to themselves, I'd like to know more. I grew up watching a show called MTV Cribs, where celebrities showed off their extravagant homes. People were curious to see what was inside. Today, the proliferation of shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians are so popular because people are curious to see their lives. The show MTV Cribs would start, come on in, welcome to my crib, let me show you around. The show brings you in to find beautiful rooms, pools, bowling alleys, fancy cars. Now think with me for a moment. What would it look like if a Christian were to open up not just their home, but their life? What would be inside? What would that look like? Well, we can think back to the fruit of the Spirit. A Christian's life, when opened up, should be full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, humility, faithfulness, and self-control. That's what is in God's house. If you go back and watch an old MTV Cribs episode, everything will probably be out of style. Leopard print rugs, indoor fountains. But if you look at a Christian's life and see what's inside, those fruits of the Spirit will never go out of style. Kindness will always stand out. Holiness in your life, in your family, in your community, in your workplace will always stand out. Winning their curiosity requires living a distinctly Christian life. Friends, we must plant the flag so that people know you are a Christian. And we pray that it will spark flickers of curiosity, at least to some. Our role then in evangelism is to fan into flame. I've found that there's no more helpful way to do that than to ask good questions once you've planted the flag. Get them talking about themselves. If you see a strength in them, ask them how they developed it. Ask them questions you could imagine they'd be excited to answer, but others would rarely ask. Honestly and genuinely commend them. Be slow to critique. Be honest with them about yourself, your life, your family, your faith. And then maybe at the right time, you might want to ask a question like this. You might say, friend, do you have a faith? This win takes much prayer and patience. How can you win their curiosity? Plant the flag and ask good questions. You can bring up spiritual things in a non-threatening way. You can tell your story. You can ask them about theirs. What can you do and say so that your friend might say to themselves, I would like to think and talk more about that sometime. Win number 3, win their curiosity. Win number 4, win their time. At the end of the day, we have to win their time in order to talk about God. If all we do is talk about win 1, 2, and 3, well, then we aren't really winning at the end of the day. Win number 1, 2, and 3 aren't even necessarily Christian. Lots of non-believers might do 1, 2, and 3 well, and they have no intentions of knowing Christ or making Him known. To be an evangelist, we can't just be good friends. We eventually have to win their time and talk about Jesus. But here's what I've observed in many well-intentioned Christians. Here's what they try to do first. They try to win their time first. They try to win their time without winning their smile, without winning their trust, without winning their curiosity. In our college ministry, one of my jobs has been to help students be witnesses for Jesus wherever they are at in life. One of the things that they'll often do is become RAs in freshman dorms so they can strategically position themselves for relationships. And I've seen so many Christians, well-intended, take this important step, and before they even meet the person, invite them to a Bible study. Friends, that's a great way to be bold. It may not always be very wise. It's a great intention, but for people who are far from Christ or not interested, this is typically not going to yield the most fruitful results. I've seen this happen in neighborhoods where mothers or wives or women will say, "Will you come to a Bible study?" without meeting the person first, without winning their smile, without winning their trust and their curiosity. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's better to try and to fail than to not try at all. But I think that winning their time is fourth for a reason. So how do you win someone's time? Well, try to secure an intentional time to talk about God. Inspire them to want to get together with you. Maybe just boldly invite them to get together. I remember when a good friend of mine was going through a difficult time in his family. I knew I had to win his time in order to talk about Jesus. He didn't live close by, so I set it aside. I asked him if we could get together, and I wanted to hear about his life. I won his time, and I was able to share Christ with him. What can you do to get your friend to say, "I'm planning on being there"? Win number 4, win their time. Our last win number 5, win their involvement. What is meant by winning their involvement? Well, I think one of the biggest obstacles to Christians and the message of Christianity is that Christians are so preachy. Don't judge me. Don't tell me what I have to believe. Now, certainly, the message is the only thing that can change someone. We're not preaching or teaching a man-centered message, but in a relational context, we have to think critically about how that message is delivered. Do we get together with people and just lecture them and just challenge them with weighty truths? Or do we engage them in the content like skilled shepherds, carefully guiding people along their journey? How can we do that? Let me offer 2 suggestions. And one is one that I've already given. And so I just want to underscore how important I think this is. Number 1, get good at asking good questions. I once had a professor tell me that preparing questions was like shopping for the perfect gift. You have to think about who the person is, how they're going to respond, how they might receive the gift. You have to take time to search and to carefully wrap and prepare the question for the recipient to open it. You can always start a conversation with someone. "Hey, if you were to die tonight, where would you go to heaven?" And just blitz right through, maybe passing interest and passing values to the ultimate question. Now that works for some, but for most of us, we get to those things, we get to the important things by asking good questions, by talking about interest and values. That's just how conversations work. That's how relationships work. And generally, as the relationship grows, the deeper we can go with someone. A great question can start on the interest level or even the surface level and help you move to the value level and maybe one day to the worldview level. Listen to Proverbs 20, verse 5. "The purpose of a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." We draw it out by listening and asking good questions. Jesus asked so many questions in the Gospels. In fact, it seems as if he asked more questions than he gave answers to. That should tell us something. Get good at asking good questions, because good questions are some of your best friends in the evangelistic context that you might find yourself in. Questions are non-threatening. They communicate humility. They allow listeners to discover truth for themselves. And usually, they typically elicit a response in return. Asking good questions is a skill that so many of us need to grow in, myself included. And I'll tell you this, I'll be honest, I have asked bad questions in Bible studies before. I've asked questions, we've said, let's look at John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. First question, who did God love? It's such a simple question and such a simple answer that it's not a good one. It can almost feel insulting at times. A good question, friends, is intelligent. It's open-ended. It raises a point without being manipulative. Good questions help us to understand people at each layer: interest, values, and worldviews. They help us move the conversation forward. So my first suggestion is get good at asking good questions. Suggestion number 2, if you are holding a Bible study, ask them if they will host it. You know, sometimes it can be better just to get into their world. If they can host, if they can prepare the drinks and the snacks at the Bible study, you've won their involvement and their ownership of the time. When I was ministering actively on campus, I would have lots of evangelistic Bible studies, but I never held one in my house. Never once did I say, let's have an evangelistic Bible study at my house. I would always hold it at one of the places where the men lived, where I was ministering to. It made it less intense. It made it more relational. It was a safer context for them. So you can meet at your favorite coffee shop or their favorite coffee shop. You can get out of your world and enter into theirs. You can go to their house. Friends, what can you do to create an engaging spiritual environment that people will feel ownership of? What can you do to help those that you are ministering to think, you know what? Studying the Bible really resonates with me. Win number 5, win their involvement. Number 1, win their smile. Number 2, win their trust. Number 3, win their curiosity. Number 4, win their time. And number 5, win their involvement. Now, we have to recognize at the end of that, you can secure all 5 of those wins and someone not become a Christian. This is not a method to help people become Christians more easily. We have to pray and rely and trust on God to do that. But I think these 5 principles, I think these 5 practicals are very helpful steps to helping people meet Jesus Christ. Okay, tool time. Tool time for us, it's going to be quick. I'm sure that many of you throughout this process have asked the question, well, how do I share with my family? How do I share with those closest to me? Today's tool time is an article from Max Stiles entitled just that, How to Share Your Faith with Your Family. I'd love for you to download that, to read it over. It'll take about 10 to 15 minutes. I think you'll really be encouraged. I think he asks and answers a lot of questions that many of you might have in terms of reaching your family with the gospel. Well, that's all the time we have this week. I hope you'll join us next week for our conclusion in Evangelism Principles and Perspectives. Thanks so much for being here.